Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Trebek, and on behalf of California State Parks, I would like to welcome you to Hearst San Simeon State Historical Monument, better known as Hearst Castle. The road you are traveling is the same one the art collector and newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst traveled when he began building this estate with his architect Julia Morgan in 1919. They worked on this project for 28 years. William Randolph Hearst was 56 in 1919 when his mother Phoebe died, his father having passed away earlier. William inherited this land he had loved nearly all his life and immediately hired a talented and singular architect, Julia Morgan, whose firm was located in San Francisco. Hearst was overheard walking into Miss Morgan's office and announcing he was tired of camping in tents. I'm getting a little old for that. I'm thinking of building a little something. Well, his little something became this estate of more than 165 rooms. And he chose to build it on the hill which had served as his family's original campsite. And now we invite you to imagine what it would have been like to visit this glamorous estate in Mr. Hearst's time. For him, it was always the Enchanted Hill. Get ready for your enchantment to begin.
Go to the outdoor pool over here, which doesn't have any water right now because it's being worked on. Sit in the outdoor furniture, pick up some sun, take a nap, whatever you'd like. Wander around the cottages. When you're ready to go down the hill, you're going to go to the back of the house where the tennis courts are. Under the tennis courts is the indoor pool. That's where you're going to go to pick up your bus. Now, when we start going up the steps, when we get to the red clay steps, watch your step very carefully because they are uneven steps, okay? Now, you're here because William Randolph Hearst wanted some place to get away from society on the East Coast. He was a California boy, born in San Francisco in 1863, and in 1865, his father started buying up Central Coast ranch land with money he had made in the silver mines of Nevada. He's the one who chose this to be a campsite for the family to get away from the summer fog of San Francisco. And here William learned to hunt and fish, became quite a good horseman, fell in love with the hilltop, but he couldn't do anything about it until 1919, when he was 56 years old and his mother passed away and he inherited the ranch from his mother. He got in touch with Julia Morgan, the foremost female architect of her day, who was already known to the family, and he said to her that he was getting a little too old for camping in tents. Couldn't they build a little something on top of the hill? Well, you're coming to visit Mr. Hearst at his ranch, and you get to explore the little something that he and Julia Morgan have created on top of La Cuesta Encantada, the Enchanted Hill. The two outside cottages look a little more Italian. The one in the middle, which you can't see right now, but you'll be able to see on your self-guided tour, is a little more Moorish and Spanish in flavor. And Mr. Hearst wanted the latest in plumbing for his new buildings up here, and he got that. He got the latest in heating and the latest in building materials also. So his bathrooms, all 42 of them in the main house, at a time when much of rural America didn't have running water. This house was finished in 1928. He's got 42 bathrooms with white tile walls and floors, pedestal sinks, flushometer toilets, Flowmaster handles in the showers, and then in his other bathrooms he has marble floors and walls. And for heating, he's got the latest in electric coil Wessex heaters in almost every bedroom and sitting room, and all four of the buildings are made out of steel reinforced concrete from the bottom up to help withstand fire and earthquake. It's a material that Julia Morgan learned to use as the first female to graduate in architecture from the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts, School of Fine Arts in Paris, France. She was also the first woman to be given a license for architecture in California. So as his guest, you would have arrived here after a very special 1.5 to 3 hour taxi limousine ride from the train station in San Luis Obispo, or maybe you flew into his private airfield down below, or sailed into the cove, or drove all the way up here in your car from Santa Monica. Of course, if you did, you'd probably need a new car to get home. You would have been met on the cul-de-sac down here by a housekeeper or other staff member, and your belongings taken to one of the guest quarters. Now, if it was good weather like today, you were more likely to be staying in one of the cottages. If it was bad weather, stormy and rain and so forth, you were more likely to stay upstairs or in the north wing. That's because you had to walk to the dining room for all your meals. Mr. Hearst does not believe in room service. So don't even pick up that phone and call for that sandwich. It's not going to happen, okay? Now, when they got finished unpacking your luggage for you, they would have told you about the day's activities. Horseback riding, swimming, tennis, hiking, picnicking. Go see one of the world's largest private zoos. Your time is your own. The only thing they would have asked of you is that you be in the assembly room sometime between 7 and 7:30 p.m. to meet your fellow guests and have a cocktail. So you would have entered the arch here, guarded by the two 15th century Spanish wild men, through the 16th century Spanish gilded wrought iron gate. Now, the only problem is on the other side of that gate, on the floor, is a recently conserved 2,000-year-old marble mosaic that looks a lot like the ones from Ostia, Italy. Welcome to Mr. Hearst's front door. Now, if you think this looks a little bit like a Renaissance Spanish cathedral sitting on top of a hill in Spain with the village laid out down below, that's exactly the impression that Mr. Hearst and Miss Morgan were looking for when they got together in 1919. They pored over books, photographs, and drawings, were highly influenced by the Renaissance architecture of Italy and southern Spain, and they wanted to build something that reflected the Spanish heritage of California, but they wanted it to be more unique than the Spanish colonial style that was so prevalent at the time. And they built in what has often been described as a Mediterranean revival style. The front of the house looks a little more Spanish. The back of the house looks a little more Italian. Now, don't get the wrong idea, though. Even though this looks like a cathedral, it is in no way, shape, or form a house of worship. This is Mr. Hearst's grand country home, and you've been invited to come here and have a good time. So as you come in, make sure your flash is turned off. Make sure you stay on the tour mat. The marble mosaic will be on your left as you go by the front arch. Having dressed for dinner, this is where you came to meet your fellow guests. Here you might find members of the Hollywood crowd, publishers, writers, reporters, executives, visitors from Europe, politicians, athletes. Anybody that Mr. Hearst might have an interest in could be in the room when you walk in. So you might find the British actor David Niven sitting here in the overstuffed couch. Over at the piano, you might find Okie Carmichael playing Stardust. At the small square table, you might see a couple of the Hollywood types putting together a jigsaw puzzle, or maybe playing Monopoly. Over here at the round table, you might find A.P. Giannini, president of Bank of America, playing poker with his banking buddies. The one person you're not going to find in the room right now, probably, is going to be Mr. Hearst himself, because 7 or 7:30 p.m. on the West Coast is 10 or 10:30 p.m. on the East Coast. And he's on the phone talking to some of his editors, putting his newspapers to bed. So who's going to be your host or hostess until Mr. Hearst can come down? It's going to be the American movie actress, Marion Davies. Now, Mr. Hearst was married. In 1903, he married the former chorus girl, Millicent Wilson. They had 5 boys together, but in 1925, they separated. They never got a divorce, and we don't know why. 1926, 1 year later, the American movie actress, Marion Davies, became the hostess here on top of the hill. She had been a Ziegfeld Follies girl that Mr. Hearst met on the East Coast around 1916 or 1917. She made movies on the East Coast. When the movie industry relocated to the West Coast, she came with it, did very well in the movies, made the transition from silent movies to talkies, and in 1938, when Mr. Hearst was having cash flow problems, she loaned him $1 million. You multiply that times 22, and you have that in today's money. She's the one who's going to take you by the hand, lead you around the room, introduce you to everybody, and make you feel at home until Mr. Hearst himself can come down through the secret door, which really isn't a secret door. It's just carved to look like the rest of the wood around it. And he's going to walk up to you and ask you about your profession, because that's why you're here. He wants to know more about you. Or you might ask him about his art collection, in which case he's going to wax poetically because he knows a lot about it, and he loves his art collection, especially his tapestries. He likes the tapestries, he says, because they tell stories in silk and wool. And what does he do for a living? He tells stories in the newspapers. The two tapestries on the west wall and the two on the east wall above me are part of a set of 10 that tell the exploits of Scipio Africanus, the Roman general who defeated the Carthaginian general Hannibal. These were woven in Brussels in the 16th century out of silk and wool, and are about 15 feet by 23 feet, and are one of the reasons this room is as long as it is. And as you look around the room, you're going to notice that Mr. Hearst collects many different types of art. Paintings, tapestries, ceilings, sculpture, cigarette sets. What in the world do you get the art collector who already has everything? How about a 16th century presentation casket like this one in the middle of the table? This one is made in either Italy or France out of ebony and gilt bronze. The lid has semi-precious stones in it, and the part that you can see through isn't glass, it's polished quartz. Now, this was given to him in 1927 by French and Company as a token of appreciation. French and Company are a group of interior designers and art dealers on the East Coast who specialize in antique chairs and tapestries. And seeing as how there's over 120 tapestries up here on top of the hill, you can bet that some of them came from French and Company. Now, when Mr. Hearst gets finished talking to you about his art collection, well, somewhere around 9 or 9:30, he's going to invite you into the dining room, and you get to see who you sit next to tonight for dinner. Make sure you stay on the tour mat. Make sure your flash is still turned off. Sir? Yeah, it's kind of hard when you're looking at the same thing. Make sure your flash is still turned off. You know how those little electronic devices like to have minds of their own. This is the room that you had to come to for all your meals. Breakfast, served around 9 or 9:30 in the morning. There'd be a small menu on the table. You could put a check mark by the items you wanted, and it would be brought to you from the kitchen. Lunch was served somewhere around 2 or 2:30, and was usually some sort of buffet. Dinner was a little more formal in that you usually had a place card with your name on it. Let's not touch anything, please. Thank you. With your name on it, telling you where you were going to sit that night. So you may have gotten to sit next to Cary Grant, or maybe Carol Lombard. This is Mr. Hearst's Gothic refectory. A refectory is a dining room in a monastery, convent, or university. And down the middle of the room, we have this very long, narrow, 17th century Italian refectory table. And the advantage of this type of table is that you can get table after table after table in here side by side and seat a lot of people in this long, narrow room. But there's another advantage to this table. I can sit in Mr. Hearst's chair here and talk across the table to my table mate over here and my table mate over here without having to raise my voice too much above the clink and clatter of the dishes and silverware. Speaking of which, for a rich man's home, this is a little disappointing. The dishes with the old blue willow pattern could be bought in almost any department store of that time. The silverware and the glasses are very, very plain. Paper napkins. And look at this. He's left the condiments in the original jars. Tisk, tisk, tisk. Well, that's because he wanted to remember this as Camp Hill when he used to camp up here with his family, and then later on with his own family when he was married. Even to the point of putting his guests in these 20th century folding chairs inspired by 17th century Italian folding chairs made for him by French and Company out of antique chair pieces and antique brocades. And if you look around the room, you'll see that Mr. Hearst has continued using this idea of choir stalls as wood paneling. These choir stalls are older than the ones in the other room. They're done in a Gothic manner. The ceiling is a 16th century Spanish high definition carved ceiling with saints and coats of arms. We have, let's see, we've got St. Francis here in the corner. We've got St. Mary right over where Mr. Hearst sits. And then right here in the middle, we've got St. George, the giant slayer, or the dragon slayer. And then the flags are contrade flags, or district flags from Siena, Italy. They're here to help give this room that Gothic feel with a pointed ceiling, but also to add color. Here you could sit and talk to your fellow guests about what you did that day. There might be a jigsaw puzzle or two out for you to work on, or just put your head back and admire the ornate ceiling up above. Now, this one is from Spain. It is been recently conserved to reveal the red paint and the white geometric pattern. Behind the mantle is a flue that is too small for the fireplace to work properly. And whenever you light the fire, the room fills with smoke. And then you've got to open the back door in order to make the fireplace draw. Flower design comes from either northern France or Flanders and is called the stag hunt. And you've got the huntsman blowing his horn and the rich man getting ready to ride after the hounds with his friends. This is the kind of tapestry that you would find hanging in a rich man's country home. And where are we today? In a rich man's country home. So you found your way into Mr. Hearst's game room. And it's also called his billiard room. He has 2 billiard tables in here. That needs to turn off the flash, please. We have a true billiard table on that end, sometimes called French billiards or carom billiards. It has no pockets. It's played with only 3 balls. The idea is to use your cue stick, knock your white ball off the cushion into the red ball. When you get better, you're going to be expected to hit 2 cushions before you hit the red ball. And when you get really, really good, you're going to be hitting 3 cushions, playing 3-cushion billiards. Down here is the British adaptation known as pocket billiards. She's over there smiling and nodding her head. She's done this before, I can tell. In America, we call it pool because of the pool of money placed on the table as a bet before the game begins. Watch your fellow guests play pool. The one thing you probably didn't want to do, however, was get into a money game with Mr. Hearst himself. He was said by some to have been very good with a pool cue in his hand. Because they were also invited to come in and watch movies. In spite of being a movie producer, the only type of movies ever shot up here during Mr. Hearst's time were silent home movies.
Doug was an elected ruler in Venice who served for a term of about 7 years. And Julia Morgan is an architect who worked with Hearst. She's also the interior designer and the landscape architect. Now, if you folks have been to Venice, they use mostly Baroque and Rococo influences in their interior design. Julia Morgan incorporated some Italian Renaissance features in the room. Ceiling above us is Italian Renaissance. It's coffered. And the Italians used a little bit more pastel colors than the Spaniards. The bed is Italian Renaissance as well. Headboard, walnut. Gentleman's initials and coat of arms are on the left-hand side. His wife's initials and coat of arms are on the right-hand side. And that's about all we know about people who commissioned that bed. In Venice, Italy, they used this brocatile fabric. They used it for decorative purposes as well as insulation. If you've been there, have you folks been, any of you been to Venice? It's really, you know, it's really hot, right? You can't stand it this summer, and then you go there in the winter, and it's freezing. And so they would use this both for decorative and insulation purposes. Here, our climate's a little bit more moderate in California, so it's purely decorative. And in Venice, the second floor of the Doge's Palace, at least 4 low quatrefoils. What's the symbol of the city of Venice? Maybe folks remember the attribute of St. Mark, the winged lion. You see him all over the place in Venice. He's over the doorway, leading into the next room. So Julia Morgan incorporated that into the design of this sitting room. Hearst said, you know, let's be really authentic. It's fun for them to wear these clothes and walk around with old cigarette holders as well, wear the kind of the Coco Chanel style pearls. It's really popular in the 1930s. So we're going to go back in time about 100 years. Right now we're in the Baroque and Rococo period, which was a lot of gold leaf and heavy furnishings. We are going to see some bathrooms, by the way. There's 38 bedrooms, 42 bathrooms. You're going to see a couple upstairs, but I'm going to take you up to the cloisters rooms. There are 3 rooms along this hallway. The first one, you're going to see a typewriter. Some of Hearst reporters, executives would stay there when they came out. Staff stayed there before their rooms were completed along these rooms. Cloisters is a covered walkway, often in a monastery, so it's appropriate that sometimes single women would stay here. And all of these 3 rooms have 2 separate bathrooms. In rural America, rural California, most homes didn't even have indoor plumbing. And so it was nice to not have to share a bathroom with someone you didn't know when you were sharing a room with them. And as you look to the south, on clear days, we can see about 40 miles. You can see the ocean. Yep, the ocean. And again, when there's no fog, no marine layer, again, all the way to a place called Montana de Aurora. 1,000 pine trees planted by William Randolph Hearst to the left. Mexican fan palms are brought up here. Hearst had an extensive collection of Americana, a lot of writings by the folks who signed the Declaration of Independence, and I also had about 4,100 books in here, some date back hundreds of years. But what was a special treat for the guests is when they would come in here, might be here reading a book, and in walks P.G. Wodehouse, familiar, the English playwright George Bernard Shaw, Irish playwright, Nobel Prize winner in literature, was a guest who stayed in the largest guest cottage, Casa del Mar. Probably the most famous author was F. Scott Fitzgerald, and he was a good friend of hers. Have any of you folks seen the people are surprised when I tell them that this was Hearst's bedroom. Because it's not the largest, it's not the most opulent, but he was really busy. He's running 94 businesses throughout the country. He has 6 major properties throughout the world of comparable size, including a real castle. It's called St. Donat's, over in Wales near Cardiff. It's now part of Atlantic College. So he didn't have time to sleep, basically. But when he did, this was his bed. It's tall, over 6'4", had the bed modified in length. These are antique beds. People are shorter, keep on growing taller and taller, right? Due time. And so this one and the one in Casa del Mar are the only 2 beds that are a little bit longer than the rest of the antique beds in the collection. The woman in the portrait to the right, Phoebe, his mother, gave him the love of art, school teacher, spoke fluent French, took him on a grand tour of Europe when he was just 10 years old, where he started his art collection. Very accomplished woman, philanthropist, first female regent in the University of California system, one of the founders of the PTA, Parent Teacher Association, as well as the YWCA, and Women's Christian Association. And that's her photograph. The lampshades, the 4 lampshades surrounding the room, created out of sheepskin, goatskin, it's parchment, indentured servant contracts. We have over 24,000. So when Hearst went back east to New York City, got really involved in politics. He was a 2-term congressman. He ran unsuccessfully for mayor of New York City, and he ran unsuccessfully for governor of the state of New York in 1906. Met his wife Millicent there, and they married a day before Hearst turned 40 in 1903. Had 5 sons between 1904 and 1915. But Hearst really missed being out here on a ranch. He was a country gentleman. He liked riding a horse. He liked camping. And so his wife, on the other hand, loved city life and New York society life. And Hearst met and fell in love with a second showgirl. Eventually, the silent movies began in New York, and everyone was coming out west, and they were doing the westerns. So he decided he wanted to come back to California with his new love. His wife was Catholic. She would have been ostracized from society, high society as well, and she would not grant him a divorce. So he brought Marion Davies out to California, built her a mansion north of the pier in Santa Monica. She became the hostess up here at what they call the ranch, and this was her room. And they came up here as often as they could, entertaining some of the biggest stars. They did spend their time. The sons have all passed. There are 15 grandchildren, 3 of them have passed. Patty Hearst is a granddaughter. Everybody's heard of her. So she met the ones. Yes. And she still comes here regularly. I mean, to do horseback riding.
Yeah, don't they still maintain one college?
No. Ever since the kidnapping in '74, they'll stay outside. So they don't stay in Costa Del Mar anymore. So. William Randolph Hearst is in the portrait in the back. There's another second fireplace, and that was painted by his good family friend Norman Peck, a student of John Senior Sargent, the famous American portraitist. Hearst would come here between 1 and 4 in the morning. Presses are running back east. So he wanted to oversee what was going on. Didn't have computers, fax machines, you know. You had 1930s technology, telegraph, teletype, that sort of thing. And Jack London, Mark Twain both wrote for him. Hired the best writers that money could buy. He started or acquired magazines that you folks have probably read, at least heard of. Cosmopolitan was one of them, a little bit different than it is today. People would walk up here and then look up to that teakwood cornice. That was California craftsmen. We could, rather than bringing in folks from Europe. See how that Utah limestone facade is on the front of Casa Grande, but on the back, the wires, they never quite finished this project. Hearst said it was about halfway completed when he left here in '47. Coastal live oak trees in front of us, native to California. Many of you folks know the hotel, it's the Big Theme Hotel, the funky hotel in San Luis Obispo, Madonna Inn. It's all pink and all the rooms are decorated different. Yes, all the rooms are Della Robbia pieces versus the piece in the middle where the family was trying to copy their style. A lot more detail in the Della Robbias. And they also did the wreaths above the windows, and so that's why we call this the Della Robbia room, because we have several of their pieces in here. 2 bathrooms, 2 beds, like the other rooms in the cloisters. Her sons would stay here. Single women sometimes would stay here as well. Kind of back to that Baroque and Rococo period. Heavier design, bathrooms down below. As much as the women liked these rooms, they said, you know, let's let Cary Grant stay here. Because look at the narrow staircase and the rope.
Okay, now you're going to get wet. Okay, quickly.
I know, just something like that catches on, and there you go. So we got our bubblegum alley, just like that.
Grace, come and look around here.
We still have more to see as we travel down the hilltop, and we thank you for remaining in your seat, and please help us by not eating or drinking right now. As we descend the coastline and fabulous views become visible again, you can see why William Randolph Hearst went to the expense and difficulty of building his estate at the top of such a high hill. You may also be able to see a long airstrip that he had built in 1945 in order to land a Douglas DC-3C. It was the third airstrip constructed by Mr. Hearst, who frequently flew into San Simeon from the mid-1920s on. It is still in private use. Farther north up the coast, you may see the Piedras Blancas Lighthouse, which is still in operation, having been in continuous use since 1874. Tours of the lighthouse are available. Just south of the lighthouse is a cove that during many times of the year is filled with elephant seals. These massive ocean mammals rest on the sand, mate, and give birth in this cove. Extreme caution should be taken when viewing them. There are viewing stations located off the highway. If you'd like to learn more about the region, you can visit the Coastal Discovery Center